Right, that's all my pre-flight checks done. We're good to go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy, hectic schedules to come along today, just to really wrap up the marketing series that's been expertly put together by Sadie. So thank you to Sadie for doing that. This is it's been really valuable. Obviously, being on the sessions as the host, I've learned an awful lot listening to people coming on. I see that we've got Leslie Fetis, as in lettuce. That's what you told me last time. So thank you very much for your contributions to this series as well. So as part of the series, what we did was we put together a poll. Morning, Leslie. I can see you now. We put together a poll as part of this, and what we were really looking for is some market research into what businesses have done throughout the last year, especially in 2020. 2020 was a real curveball. When we start to think about how businesses marketed themselves, there was massive differentiation between sectors, and realistically, we just wanted to really get a bit of a heads up and an idea as to what people were doing, what their issues were, what they were finding was successful, and sharing that information. So to everybody that contributed, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that. I'm going to start by sharing my screen real quick. So bear with me. Excellent. So hopefully, all things being equal, you can see that okay. Can you see that okay? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Just a, yep, awesome, fantastic. Thank you very much. So essentially, I've mixed in some of the research that we already did as an organization anyways, because I thought it would be quite good just to enrich the data set with some additional kind of market research that we've done. But essentially, this remains true. It doesn't matter which business we talk to. There is always 3 to 5 apps in flight for marketing and sales management, whether that is a separate CRM to something for email marketing, something for social media, something for your website. Essentially, you know, most businesses have at least 3 to 5, and the most I've heard is 15. One business had 15 separate apps for sales management and marketing, which is, it's a logistical challenge. It doesn't matter which way we spin this out. It's always going to be difficult. Just thinking about the amount of identities you have to have, the amount of different passwords, you know, it's uber complex, and you know, it makes the whole kind of infrastructure difficult to manage, but also at the same time expensive in terms of productivity and license costs. By the way, if anybody has any questions through this, just feel free to interrupt. If anybody wants to drill into any of the data a little bit more, happy to do that. This is your session. Let's make sure you get what you want from it. First and foremost, in terms of the kind of cohort that we were looking at, what's quite interesting here is the employee size sort of matches quite well with what we see as the SME community in the UK from a business perspective. So if we just look through this, and this is just really helping with data validation, that as you go up in terms of employees, the percentage of answers against this diminishes in exactly the same way as the amount of businesses in the UK. So I just thought that was quite an interesting stat to call out first and foremost, but it also validates the kind of broad brush approach to the market, that we've got, you know, the right cohorts from each of those employee sizes, which again just sort of helps validate the data. The other thing as well is we had quite a lot of different roles. Essentially 41% of other, by the way, is actually senior leadership. So that is director, it's CEO, any form of senior management. So essentially you could group the 41% in there with the 11%, and that would give you that sort of C-level executive stroke, you know, senior positions inside an organization. So that's pretty much half the contribution of the stats in here. And then sales management obviously is the smallest sort of cohort in terms of the marketing data set, but still very relevant, especially when we start to look at, you know, some of the things that sales typically get involved with. So first and foremost, you know, when you start to think about the importance of marketing in 2020, you know, this is a really nice graph, purely and simply because it shows that everybody still had huge investment in marketing. And when we start to think about this in other scenarios, bear in mind, sorry, we got a really strong cohort across many different demographics of sector as well. So we've got professional services, we've got finance, we've got construction, we've got manufacturing, we've got farming. So the outcome of this is that actually everybody still perceived the world, which is I really need to concentrate on my marketing and get involved. When you think only 14% actually thought that it wasn't particularly important to focus on marketing. Now, the other piece to this is bear in mind that there was a lot of industries that were hit quite heavily with COVID, yet they still doubled down and added their investment into promoting their business. Typically through any recession, marketing is one of the first budgets to get axed, right? And so this shows that actually everybody was still vested in marketing their business. Just out of interest, does anybody want to add anything to this, or from their business perspective, did they look at this in a different way, or did you just treat it as though it was 2019? Anybody have anything to add to this? It's going to be a tough crowd, isn't it? Tough crowd on a Thursday morning. Okay, well, we'll keep going through. So essentially, this is a really, really interesting slide, purely and simply because, when we start to look at the differentiation between how businesses treat their marketing budget, there's an awful lot to think about. But essentially, there is sort of some standards out there that most businesses should adhere to. I think the call out point here is that Xero, by the way, is not known. So 21% of people didn't actually know what their marketing budget looked like, and they could be from roles in sales, if you remember the 11% at the beginning. Essentially, though, when you start to look above 8%, that's getting into the slightly more extreme budget sizes. And as you can see there, the contribution is pretty low in terms of the amount of businesses that actually spend more than 8%. Essentially, the average is between 7 and 9. So as a rule of thumb, businesses typically allocate between 7 to 9% of their annual revenue on their marketing budget. As a business, we probably spend 20% of our revenue on marketing right now. If you look at startups, typically spend a lot more. If you're uber geeky on this sort of stuff, which unfortunately I am, Salesforce right now is spending 35% of their revenue on marketing. That's Salesforce. Just have a think about that for a second. This is a 20-plus-year-old organization, has the largest market share in the world of CRM, right? The biggest software sector in the world is CRM, yet they're spending 35% of their revenue right now. Can anybody tell me why they're doing that?
Because they're a strong brand and they believe in investing in it. They don't want to let their competitors take any part of their market.
Absolutely that. Yeah, Microsoft CRM Dynamics is coming down really hard on Salesforce because it's free as part of your Microsoft 365, or it's bundled in typically if you've got like a large enterprise agreement with Microsoft. And so exactly that, Salesforce are basically protecting their landscape against Microsoft. So what's interesting about that, though, is if we think about the business community that we have as a whole, it's the fact that marketing is there not only to generate new sales, but also to protect your existing landscape. I would say we spend more money on enablement marketing than we do on lead generation. So keeping our customers informed in what we're doing and trying to keep everybody moving in that direction. But you're exactly right, Leslie. And also, if you look at Salesforce as a brand, it's a strong brand. And it's a brand that they've built year and year and year. And I would say their sort of woodland theme is what, probably 5 years old now, 4 or 5 years old. And they're not going to shift away from that because of the huge investment that they're making. So right now, Salesforce is spending as much money as typically most, Silicon Valley startups spend in terms of percentage of their revenue. And, their revenues are huge. So on that basis, what was interesting about this, though, is there's quite a lot of businesses that are spending below that threshold. And actually, when we start to think about that, is that through, tightening reins in the last year, or is that, the average consensus of what they spend on a whole? Either way, I think, if you're applying the 7 to 9% as the average, that gives you a bit of an indicator as to where your business is on that marketing spend. And then the next piece to that puzzle is just being very effective with whatever you're spending your budget on, essentially, which is interesting. And we'll come to that in a bit more detail as we go through this. So when we start to think about channels, and this I found really interesting, purely and simply because there's such a different split out here in terms of cohorts. on what you're spending your money on as a business. For instance, industry press and radio seems to drop. If we think 20, 30 years ago, that would have been a much higher percentage, purely and simply because it would have been the only way to really market your business. I'm thinking pre-internet at this point, or certainly, ADSL and those sort of technologies. But what's really interesting about this is the fact that, the paid channels are so low. Social media paid and website paid is essentially 11% of the marketing channels that are being used to market businesses at the moment. Whereas the big call outs are the standards which you'd expect, which is the email marketing size, 20%, 20% is social media organic, and then you've got the 13% on leaflets and flyers, 17% on website SEO. So they're the sort of big four in terms of what everybody seems to be doing, but at the same time as well, they're kind of what you'd expect. When we start thinking about the social media side of things, organic social media is free, everybody can do it. So pretty much every business should be vested in that anyway. But actually, I was quite surprised with the low amount of website paid Google AdWords. Now, whether that's over competition with certain AdWords, we can't use Google AdWords, right? We'd be paying $20, $30 a click. So maybe it's that's forcing people out of that world. Or maybe it's just the fact that actually the attention's turned to social. Everybody's gone to social from an organic perspective. But I thought this was quite an interesting stat. Again, knowing a lot of businesses from 5-6 years ago were putting a lot of money into things like Google AdWords, to see that diminish is quite interesting. Does anybody on the call still use Google AdWords, by the way? Maybe I should have spun that around for more participation. Is anybody on the call not using Google AdWords? I'm kidding. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the same here. It's just, I think the part of the challenge is the fact that the spend has just grown, and also the level of competition means that, unless you've got deep pockets and a long-term budget, it's not tangible. Interestingly, though, I guess this really means that anything that's paid in terms of online is ranking quite low at the moment. And you'd expect that, because in 2020, most businesses were looking to cut budgets anyway, or certainly reduce the amount of spend. And so if you can post out organically, why would you pay for it? That's really what we're looking at here. This is fairly surprising, actually, in a lot of ways. I mean, the big four stand out. We support the big four in our own product, which is, the Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. What's interesting about this, though, is that I actually thought that Pinterest would have a slightly higher percentage than 5%. I think Pinterest is a great channel and it's underused by a lot of businesses, especially if you've got visual products. It works really well for those markets. And at the same time as well, it's great from a brand perspective and really kind of, doubling down on things that are visual. So the fact that Instagram has 17% and Pinterest only has 5%, I thought that there was an opportunity there. TikTok, I'm not overly surprised by. TikTok strikes me as being very B2C. And when we looked at the demographic, we had a lot of B2B businesses. But it's certainly something to keep your eye on, purely and simply because depending on what they do with the platform and where it goes, and also if you're focused on B2C, TikTok looks like it might become an opportunity. And the other piece to that puzzle is early moves in that world typically get cheaper marketing. So that's just something to bear in mind. I'm not saying do it. I'm saying that it could be interesting over the next 12 months. But yeah, 91% of marketing is done across Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and I'm not surprised by that at all. From a sort of social media perspective, this was quite interesting as well. Obviously, ArcFlux isn't in the list on the left yet. Hopefully we'll come back next year, do the same thing, and it'll be in there. But essentially, there are a few call outs to this as well, which is that, Canva's quite an interesting one. What turned out is really just Image Creations suddenly starts becoming sort of a publishing house in terms of social media. I guess you'd kind of expect that. We've looked at doing some integration with Canva now, where you can save Canva images directly to our platform before you send them out. So it's becoming quite a compelling offering. What's interesting, though, is that for anybody that doesn't know this, there was a groundswell of activity on social media a few weeks back around Hootsuite licensing. Did anybody capture that and see that? Okay, so not my words, but there were people talking about 600% increase in license costs. So, and there was a groundswell of people jumping off as a result of it. The reason, that's no surprise for anybody who doesn't know, I'm a technologist. I've been in technology for 25 plus years. It's the Silicon Valley US playbook 101, which is, get a groundswell of activity around your platform and then basically squeeze people out with licenses, right? So that's really what Hootsuite are doing. I'm sure there's probably some VC or PE activity in the background that's pushing that. But essentially, HubSpot did the same thing a few years back with their kind of free CRM approach. So where I'm sort of going with that is that we're seeing Canva start to really kind of take over in that space. But I think that's just simplicity through the ability to publish when you've created the image, like single click, as opposed to, worrying about all the metrics and things that come back. Just out of interest, how many people use Canva on the call today? Okay.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Do you use it for publishing as well?
No, we use Hootsuite at the moment.
All right, okay. It is interesting. I mean, when you start to look at the different solutions, there are always going to be gaps between them as well. So when you start to think about some of the analytics that Canva could offer versus a Hootsuite or a Buffer, they're going to be slightly different. So again, it's not really a one size fits all. It really depends on what people are trying to achieve. Just out of interest, how many people push out the same message across multiple channels at the same time on social media? Does anybody do that?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So again, there's a little bit of a correlation between the ability to sort of build a single post and just distribute it versus having to set up separate posts. We've certainly had those conversations with our customers as well. And any purist social media marketer will tell you should tailor for each channel, but I'm not going to go and double click on that right now. I think we've only got another 40 minutes, so it's probably best I don't do that. But essentially, I was quite surprised with this, and there are some others that actually I thought would be in there but aren't. So again, that was quite interesting data. The sort of next slide really, again, is quite interesting in terms of the perceived ROI, and we'll come on to this one in a bit more detail as we go. But essentially, email marketing, website SEO, and organic social media seem to be turning the largest return on investments for most businesses, or the perception that they are. Now, again, if we kind of compare that back to channel usage, so email marketing, website SEO, and also social media, that sort of correlates back to what people are spending their time on predominantly, except for the fact that there's a little bit of a differentiation there in the numbers, but it's no surprise that they're returning back the right ROIs, right? So there's a direct correlation there between what you're spending your time doing and what's generating leads off the back of it. It would be interesting to see how that changes over the next 12 months and whether or not some of the paid channels start to increase as well. Leslie, from your side, I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this. When you think about brands, how have brands changed their footprint and spend, would you say, over the last 12 months? Has it been a shift, or would you say it was still very similar to 2019?
I'd say there has been a shift, and I think it's quite interesting seeing what your research has found, because I'm surprised to see leaflets and flyers still there, because I am very much, a marketing mix person. It's you've got to spread your brand message across everything you do at all the touch points. I think more brands have been spending more online, and I think that spend online has definitely been more organic, because I think their cut in budget has meant that they haven't then placed out to external agencies the same. So I think that's why you see the drop in the pay-per-click and the paid social media campaigns, because I think, what companies have done have gone like, right, what can we do in-house as a team? how can we spend our marketing budget safely and sensibly, without having to kind of spend on external agencies. I think that's how it's changed. So I think marketing budget might not have entirely gone to waste or been entirely reduced, but I think they've internalised that cost more than actually using external agencies to provide for them.
I don't agree with that as well. And also social media's over the last 3 years is radically shifting to personal brands more than corporate brands, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so it's building your, I don't want to quote Seth Godin, but tribe essentially around your personal brand as much as the business by association. From the research that we've done, we've noticed that the velocity algorithm used on LinkedIn has ranked corporate posts as a lesser citizen than personal posts in the last 12 months. And that was in fact, 18 months, we've seen that shift. So it's actually better now for you to share out on LinkedIn your own personal post and then the corporate page share that than the other way around, which is how it was previously. And then what's uber interesting is if you look at companies like Apple, they just have never posted on their corporate page.
Yeah, it's just there as a brand, isn't it? As we do exist, but yeah, they're all about a people organisation, aren't they? And driven by the talent that's in-house.
Yeah, and certainly the last kind of major tech company that I worked for, a lot of their employees now are, managed internally on how to post on social media, which is interesting. So it's almost becoming part of their role.
Yeah, I think that's a massive thing, and something I did point to in my talk that I did the other week or so about kind of giving your employees that brand advocacy and allowing them to have the tools and the ability to post on your behalf as a business. And I think that really has been a massive shift over the last couple of years, that brands are allowing or trusting their employees to be the promoters of their brand. And that's really how it should be, because you're building this internal culture to attract the talent in the first place, and then you're not allowing them to say anything when it comes to social media because they're worried about how they might be perceived. But ultimately the people who work for you should actually be your biggest advocates, shouldn't they? They should be the ones who should be able to promote you the best.
100%. And again, employee training around social media etiquette and those sort of things is the norm in a lot of larger businesses that are doing this. So they don't just say, hey, make sure you're posting. They actually start to give you brand guidelines and assistance. And we're even to the point where you can send them a transcript first and then they'll approve it and then you can send it out or help you change some content. And I've even seen employees ask marketing to provide data sets that they can use in their posts. So, it can be quite in depth, but I completely agree with you, which is, your employees are the face of your business and ultimately should be your biggest brand advocates. I haven't seen it in anybody's employment contract yet, though, as a part of their job description. But essentially, it's quite interesting that LinkedIn's taken that shift, though, back to the personal side. They also had a change in the algorithm about the same time, which was for video. They really craved video. They wanted and not shared from a third party, but uploaded directly to LinkedIn, because it was all about trying to create a video channel around their product. It's interesting. I don't know what Microsoft's long-term goal is with LinkedIn. I think we're going to see it integrate more and more into their products over time, though.
Yeah.
Certainly on the recruitment side, right?
I think they've had to sort of put themselves against the likes of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, because they've seen how much engagement those other channels get. And LinkedIn has always been this very professional, very focused channel, which, I think then didn't get the same engagement. And I think LinkedIn were feeling a bit like, oh, hang on a minute, how do we kind of up the ante a bit? How do we get people engaged? Because it was something ridiculous, like only 5% of users on LinkedIn were actually using the platform, which is, when you think how many millions of people are on it, or about hundreds of thousands of people are on it, it's such a small fraction of people who are actually really leveraging LinkedIn. So I think they had to bring in those tools. They had to bring in the video. And they've obviously tested with stories now, which you can now view on your desktop and not just on your mobile. And they've had to bring those things in, I think, to entice more people to be engaged in that platform for probably a bigger goal, whatever that is, we don't know. But
I think it is predominantly engagement. And also, though, when you look at the groundswell of activity around real self and humanization in terms of posts, you know, it's not just, if you rewind back 3 years ago, LinkedIn was very corporate, wasn't it? And so whereas people are actually starting to post, you know, I've seen people commenting, saying things like, this is LinkedIn, why are you posting a picture of your dog? You know, it's the purest LinkedIn user versus the next generation, but that's the perception, isn't it? That's how people see it. Essentially, though, you know, part of their strategy is around the recruitment side. So it's about becoming a recruitment platform first and foremost. And when you think of the fact that it ties in your CV and everything in a single click, it all sort of makes sense. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes, certainly over the next few years. But I'm with you in that the other piece to this as well is they're probably seeing Facebook, you know, Facebook B2B adverts are cropping up everywhere in the last 12 to 18 months. You know, how does LinkedIn compete against that? So what we're seeing on the surface is that kind of undercurrent of eyeballs on screens with paid posting. That's really what this is, you know, what their MO is, isn't it, after all?
Yeah, I'd agree, absolutely.
It was quite an interesting shift as well to see that people were doing paid posts on a B2B level on Facebook. Essentially, the underlying message was, well, you know what, our customers, MDs of businesses and our target market doesn't just exist on LinkedIn, but they have personal accounts as well. And that's where we're seeing this kind of convergence of personal and work. And if you start to think about in 2020 as well, we did that from an employment perspective. You know, you guys can see on my guitars, you can see pictures on my wall of my house. 2019, nobody saw this. So it is a convergence again of corporate and personal, business and personal. So I think we're sort of blending all the channels. Would you agree with that again, Leslie?
Yeah, I think you're right. And you know, Facebook was very much about your own personal life, wasn't it? And I think, you know, with the advocacy of personal branding, that's kind of, Facebook has kind of got the niche in that respect. But then what has helped, I think, is we've been, I think, more accepting of B2B advertising in Facebook than we possibly have of personal branding or personal posts on LinkedIn. So it's quite interesting how the two different platforms, I think, you know, have come from different markets and now kind of trying to kind of merge the two and how that's working out for them. But yeah, I mean, I still very much see Facebook as my kind of own sort of personal space and tend not to follow businesses and things on Facebook. I do it through my business. But LinkedIn, yeah, very much more, it's all about, you know, businesses and what they're doing. So I think
that's interesting. So on that basis then, Leslie, we have a Facebook group and community around our product, which is B2B focused, right? So in that sense, we've sort of crossed streams, but the reason why we've done that is that, number one, Facebook had great controls around groups. And the second reason for that is actually, as a business, we have a personal relationship with all of our customers. It doesn't matter which way we spin it. You know, every single one of them's got my mobile number. So at the end of the day, it was the first kind of, from our side, it was where business met personal to a degree. Yeah. But again, when you think about communities, in my head, and I don't know whether this is right, but the perception of the community on LinkedIn is entirely different to the perception of the community on Facebook.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know whether anyone else has got comments on this, just us two having a chat, which I wasn't really expecting this morning. It's enough. But yeah, I think Facebook have nailed the groups and interaction with groups, and to me, you know, you can be part of a group without having to kind of expose all of your personal life to everybody on Facebook. And Facebook have really worked on that community basis. And I think on LinkedIn, you know, there are groups, but I don't see them engaging anywhere nearly as well as they do on Facebook. And I think because Facebook have realised that they've got this wealth of people on there, and that's the target audience, as you said before. You know, it doesn't matter what your job title is or what level of seniority you have in a business. You're on Facebook and you're a target market, and they've really worked on how to drill into that and connect to people. Whereas I think LinkedIn, I don't know, haven't quite sussed it yet, I don't think.
I think you're entirely right there. I think there's just a different perception. Typically Facebook, you don't mind exposing a little bit more of your true self on, versus LinkedIn, you do have to wear a different hat when you start typing.
Yeah.
And obviously at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, when you've been out with friends, you should go nowhere near social media, but we all know that. And should have learned that early on, unless of course you're using Twitter, and then everything's acceptable. So,
absolutely.
Twitter's actually possibly the most interesting at the moment to me. Certainly, it's just the randomness of what you see. That's probably the most blended platform right now across the major four, isn't it? You know, you've got personal quotes going up every 5 seconds, along with corporate messaging interwoven, right?
Yeah, I love Twitter. I love Twitter for the wealth of stuff you can follow and find out, and it's all little nuggets of information. I think it's brilliant. But what I really object to is when somebody tweets something and then takes a photo of it and then posts it on another platform.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
you think yourself. Brilliant.
And actually, you touch on another point there, which is the fact that pretty much every social media platform now wants organic content on their platform. They don't want you to be sharing from third parties. So that's just something to bear in mind for the next 12 months. If a lot of businesses had a YouTube channel and they would share directly from their YouTube channel to, say, LinkedIn, actually you're getting penalized for that now. LinkedIn want the original video, same as Facebook, because again, they want to steal those eyeballs away from the YouTubes and get more adverts embedded in those videos. So again, just something to bear in mind. On the spend side of things though, so I was with you in that I looked at the spend that people were getting back here. So we're saying that pretty much, most businesses are spending across the board. However, leaflets and flyers seems to be only 7% perceived reception of the ROI, when essentially it's the largest spend. How crazy is that?
I guess it takes more to put those together though. It's quite easy. Digital content is very disposable, isn't it? And it can be very quick and instant. But when you're putting something together like a leaflet and flyer, it's much more time intensified. You need to spend much more time on it. It's something that's going to be should have a longevity to it. And be available in probably different formats. So it doesn't necessarily need to be printed, but certainly a PDF that people can download or an ebook type thing. So it's available, but it is there as then a real representation of you as a business. So I think and having it well designed and it reads well. So that's all investment in creating that one piece, isn't it? Which is it will take longer to do than maybe writing a blog or adding your social media posts.
Also as well, if you've got quite complex products that need a lot around them, so when you think of things like, say, a car or a pension, or they typically come with a portfolio of printed material around the outside too. It's all part of the packaging, isn't it? So there's that piece to consider. Also, hopefully H2 this year, well, actually earlier than that, right, Sadie? So face-to-face events are back on. So, that's starting again. Leaflets and flyers are, just part of that whole landscape, being able to promote your business and give people takeaways that they can go and read at a late stage. So again, I guess that investment's always going to be there. I thought radio was a little bit like that.
I'm surprised at that. I really thought people would have invested in radio over the last year, because we've all been captive audiences, haven't we? And I'm really surprised. I'd be interested to know what the radio stats are. I haven't looked them up recently, and what their increase has been, because I'm sure there has been. I'm sure there's been more uptake on advertising on radio than there would have been this time last year or the middle of last year to the year before. It'll be interesting to see what that is. But yeah, it's interesting to see that the spend on that's quite low.
Yeah, and also as well from, if the sort of listener stats have gone up as a result of people working from home and having the radio on in the background, that strikes me as being a bit of a golden opportunity to put some spend in there to get that brand awareness out there. As part of that though, and this goes back to your point around leaflets and flyers, radio isn't just, a fire and forget. There's a little bit of effort that has to go into the preparation of the message. What are you trying to get across? And sometimes there's production costs as well to consider, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if radio includes Spotify ads. That's a good shout. Spotify is definitely changing their landscape quite heavily. They've done a lot of acquisition. They want to become a content platform themselves. Actually, it's a very similar model to Netflix. If you think about it, at the very beginning of Netflix, it was just, basically being able to broadcast out other people's content. And then over the last 5-6 years, they've recognized that actually they need to become a content generator if they're going to survive. And that, the fact that you can watch the latest film, so the Avengers Endgame as an example, across 4 different platforms, that's not going to be a differentiation for Netflix. It's actually going to be the fact they're generating content. Spotify have recognized that and are doing the same thing. They I think Joe Rogan's podcast, they bought that for 100 million, right? Now, for anybody that thinks, geez, that's a lot, well, his posts get anywhere between 5 and 15 million views for his podcast, and he's doing 1 a day. That's a lot of eyeballs for 100 million. That's a lot of eyeballs. So they've recognized that they've got to do that sort of thing. So that's a great question, Janine. But at the moment, no, I don't think so. I think this is just straight radio broadcasts.
Just to put a point about Netflix, I think where they've been really good is they've kind of partnered with brands. So like with Ben and Jerry's ice cream, they've promoted themselves through other people's products. But one thing we like to do in our house, because I make everybody watch adverts and tell me what they think about them, is when you watch something that is made just for Netflix, is how much brand placement there is in those. It's brilliant. I love it. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, they're promoting Subway sandwiches without actually saying the brand name. It's just product placement, or saying the strap line, or doing this, that, and the other. So we're often watching things going, hang on a minute, what did they just say?
Yeah.
What product was that?
What watch was he wearing when he checked the time? It is quite interesting, and the Netflix story is a wonderful story. They're one of those classic businesses that most people perceive popped up about 2014 into everybody's living rooms, when the reality is they started out in 1998, I think, originally taking on Blockbuster. So they've spent a lot of years perfecting that brand and building that brand, but at the same time as well, it's the same with Zoom, isn't it? Zoom's 11 years old now, right? 11 years old. They did 400% growth in March last year. 400% growth. In actual fact, in 2020, they were in the top 5 growing apps globally, right? Up against the TikToks and things.
Yeah, it's quite amazing with the Zoom thing, isn't it? Because I always wonder, why didn't Google Meetup take over? Because everybody has Chrome, everyone has a Google account, and yet they just missed it, didn't they? It was all about Zoom and having, these Zoom meetings. But actually, we could have very easily used Google instead, couldn't we?
Well, so but a lot of this is just market forces and also luck. So the CIO at the company that I used to work for sits on the board of Zoom, which is why I know some of these stats from conversations with him. And essentially, they lucked out. They started broadcasting on the London Underground in 2019. They were literally, another PE venture, VC backed, that were basically starting to build a bit of a groundswell. They've done 7 hard years of consecutive building and getting to the point where they've started that hockey stick and walked into a pandemic. I mean, what's the chances of that, right? Whereas if you take Google, on the other hand, haven't really done much marketing around Google Meet. So that's the difference there. They were ramping up at the right time, at the right place, and just caught the wave. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And in terms of, where are all the others? The Citrix GoToMeeting, the WebExes, the Teams, or formerly Skype for Business. Teams had a bit of a role head to head with Zoom last year as well. But again, it's that, there's probably 30 other platforms that just fell away that didn't get the same sort of traction that Zoom did. And a lot of that was through the news. There was this sort of brand where it was, let's catch up on Zoom. It wasn't, let's catch up over video conference.
Yeah.
It was a bit like in 2010, 2011, I was talking to a friend whose family were in Costa Rica. This was still known as a Nokia, even if it was made by Apple. The brand association was that strong that people would say, "Oh, has anyone seen my Nokia?" No, it's an iPhone, dude. No, it's my Nokia. It's what it's known as. So yeah, it's an interesting. My favorite brand placement is duct tape. Love that. So clever, right? One letter makes all the difference, but the brand association is super strong as a result of it, right?
Yeah. Is that their tagline as well? Super strong.
No, just made that up for them. I prefer my puns intended. So next one up though is the challenges side of things. Now, I've got a lot of personal experience on this one, but essentially, these are the challenges that people highlighted as a result of it. And I'm really not surprised. When we start to think of things, if I just highlight lack of reporting and poor integration, that's almost 50%. And the net of it is that nowadays, we've got all of this stuff going on all the time that as a result of it, we need to be able to react. You don't want to sit there and have to run reports to find out who's gone to your website and also viewed you on social media. You don't want to spend time thinking about, how you can produce stats. They should just be there and in front of you so that you can react at the speed of life, especially when you start to see trends occurring. But the most important piece here is, especially within the SME community, is the lack of integration. Because you need to spin up services like, Zapier, Zaps. And by the way, Zapier is not a company that I don't like. I actually recommended them as an M&A target in about 2017 for the organization I worked for at the time. The challenge with that stuff is it breaks, or somebody changes an API and it stops working, and all of a sudden your business logic disappears. But most importantly, there's very few people that can just spin up those integrations. And that's part of the challenges. A lot of businesses have to outsource that, and that's not cheap. So the outcome of that is you end up with this kind of Excel mishmash. And of course, Excel spreadsheets don't get lost on trains with people's data on them. That would never happen in 2020 during a pandemic with a load of COVID results, would it? But the net of it is that, that's part of the challenge. Part of the challenge is being able to do this. And I think as well, marketeers as a whole are, time sliced pretty heavily nowadays. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot to do. And especially in smaller organizations where you've not got a team of 15 to 20 people doing this stuff, if you're there at the moment as a sort of 1 or 2, 3 person team, there's a lot to do. There really is. It's not something to take lightly. So having bad productivity through things like poor integration and lack of reporting doesn't strike me as being, over the top. Anybody like to talk about any of that in terms of personal experiences? Looks like it's just the two of us today then, Leslie. I know firsthand it is really difficult. I've been there, I've done it. It's part of what we do. I've got a couple of slides that talk about this just to sort of wrap out the session. But essentially, if there's one thing I can give you, and this is not, me promoting our own brand, but there is essentially some aspects to this, which is, how do you measure across every single channel today effectively and do things in real time in an automated way? And that's the other piece to it. As marketeers, you kind of want to fire and forget. And then when somebody asks for the results, they're just there. You don't want to go mining that, you're going to try and correlate it. And the other piece is, as a result of your efforts, do you know what it means to your business in terms of shifting the needle around things like opportunity sizes and outcomes. And that's really, really important, purely and simply because it justifies what you do first and foremost. But when you think back to that spend at the beginning, if you can correlate an uptick of marketing activity to generating revenue for the business, then it becomes much easier for sort of managing directors to make decisions around what that marketing spend should look like for the next 12 months, right? You sort of turning the tap on in various aspects of that. So again, that's something that we've looked at quite heavily, but there are a couple of other pieces that I'll call out here. So obviously you've got things like the third-party integration. We touched on that. You've got multiple identities, so you've got to log in different places. Of course, you wouldn't have the same password. Why would you do that, right? To simplify your own lives. I've got a password manager with like 300 passwords in it. How crazy is that? But the net of it is that there are some other pieces happening at the moment going on in the background. What was interesting was in the build up to my May 2018 for GDPR, there was this huge groundswell of activity and everybody jumped on it. And all these businesses suddenly told me how they were going to make my business GDPR compliant in my inbox. And then we got to about July, August time, and it was like the tumbleweed came through. Right, all of a sudden there was this huge groundswell of activity and then it just kind of dropped off. Well, actually, that's not gone away. It's all still there and very relevant. And later this year, we exit from GDPR back to Data Protection 2018. And we have data adequacy still with the GDPR. However, if you think about where you're sourcing your apps from, most of them are overseas, as in the US or Canada. Now, the net of that is, please go away and have a look at the terms and conditions because they will hold you liable for shifting that data overseas. And the only reason why I'm saying this is that in France, we're seeing the CNIL, who are the equivalent of the ICO, have actually started prosecuting SMEs for moving that data and not actually providing an audit trail for it. So when you start to think about the tools that you need, privacy is going to start to become more and more important. So just keep that as a mindset. It takes 3 or 4 minutes just to scan through the terms and conditions, but at least you'll have preparation should any conversations come up. Privacy is the new oil, right? And that's how it's being perceived. And there's a lot of organizations that are betting for that. So again, I'm just trying to be mindful. It wasn't part of the questions, but it's definitely part of the challenges that are going to crop up for marketeers, is to be able to prove where the data is and what you hold in terms of human data. As we all know, there's a saying within the IT industry, which is you don't apply to Google, Google applies to you, purely and simply because they already know more about you than you probably do anyway. It was always a joke within the IT industry when it came to applying for a role at Google. Essentially, though, all of the points on the slide are very, very relevant. If anybody would like a chat about any of these, please don't hesitate to reach out. Leslie, it's been awesome. Thank you very much for contributing this morning. Is there anything you'd like to add to this?
No, thanks very much for having me. I didn't quite expect to be on the hot seat today, but thank you. I've enjoyed that. I love a good chat about marketing.
Well, so do you relate to any of these challenges though around results? I mean, from a brand perspective, you're interested in so many different touch points and metrics to go back to your customers and basically prove out your engagement, right? Is that a complicated process?
Yeah, it can be, depending what your campaign is that you're doing for a client. If you're just running through one channel, then it's quite straightforward, but generally you're not. So it is a way of being able to pull together that data. But it also might not just be data from social media posts or YouTube videos. It's actually, is your advertising hitting right? If you're doing a drive on a particular sector of an audience, how do you know you're reaching them? So it's quite a convoluted and complicated process, and it's kind of being able to bring all of that together. And sometimes you don't always know. I mean, we work for customers or for clients, and all of that information is kept internally. We kind of help deliver all of the outputs, but we actually never really get to fully know what the actual data is, which is a real shame, because it would be nice to be able to say, oh, well, we've increased, we'll know that we've increased their reach, by 200%. but we won't actually know what the figures are from start to finish, which is a real shame, which I guess is a fallback of being an agency rather than an in-house marketeer. But yeah, definitely trying to pull all those different areas of data together is definitely something that could do with streamlining if there was a way of doing it.
And on top of that as well, when you start to think about, you know, we all sit there and go, why did that post get 65 likes and that one get 32? I thought that one had a, you know, the lower likes had a stronger message. Was it the time of day I did it? Was it the, yeah, there's too many variables. What you're looking for is that trend, isn't it? Overall trend, ultimately.
Yeah. But you should definitely look for those though. I mean, even I was just on our Instagram posts this morning, and you know, just going back to see what were our higher ranking ones, I was still surprised at, because you know, it's like, oh well, how did that one rate better? And then it's breaking that down to see, well, what is the content, when did I post it, and who's engaged with it. And you know, and that's really important, is who's engaged with it, because you might get a load of likes and think this is brilliant, and then you look at who's engaged with it, but actually they're not your target audience. They're just people who have just clicked on it, but well, that's interesting, I like that. And that's how you learn, and that's how you test as well. So going forwards, it's like, what can that post tell you that you can then test on your next post going forwards? And it will be a, you know, sort of A/B testing, or you know, doing a few different things just to see how it works, but there's always something to learn.
Definitely. And then the final bit to that as well is the algorithms hold a lot of the keys to that castle, and getting that initial post and a bit of a groundswell to keep the engagement going and build out to bigger and bigger audiences. But essentially it's, you know, it's an ongoing challenge. It's not going to be the same in terms of what the algorithms do and what happens today. So again, it's that mindset of being able to move with the current of trends around what people are posting and when they're posting it. But it's going to be an interesting 12 months, I think, as we come out of lockdown essentially and start going back to a lot more face-to-face. I certainly personally prefer face-to-face meetings. I like the speed of a Zoom meeting. I don't like the fact that the speed of a Zoom meeting means another one and another one and another one and another one, and end up with post-it notes that are like that. That then at the end of the day, I've got to go through to remember what I've said or promised to people. But essentially, I think we'll have a nice blended approach to the second half of the year. But also, hospitality right now is certainly kicked back into life. We've got a few customers that work within the hospitality industry, and they're saying that, you know, everything's starting to open up. So hopefully those guys have a fantastic summer and can recoup a bit of their losses from last year. That would be good. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting 12 months. Does anybody else have any questions on this before we wrap up?
Hi guys, yeah, just quickly, one of the challenges that we're an SME, strange sector, logistics, warehousing. We have a third-party marketing agency. I manage that relationship. And one of the things we're always looking at, we don't have to do a lot of direct lead generation, but for me, it's always demonstrating back to the business that the money we're spending on marketing is actually worthwhile. We do a lot of awareness marketing. We don't do salesy stuff, but it's always saying, so how are we proving our ROI? You know, how can we prove where that came from and stuff like that? And that's one of the challenges I kind of have. We don't use massive channels. We use LinkedIn. We've got Google My Business. We have our own website and stuff like that. But it's always like looking at it, because we're not doing direct campaigns. I find it very difficult to demonstrate the ROI back to the business.
So, and it's a great question. Again, it's not a shameless plug, but the platform that we've produced does exactly that. And the reason why is that because not all outbound marketing is, like you say, sales activity, but it's measuring engagement and then being able to correlate that engagement back to a sales activity. That's entirely different. So I'm happy to have that conversation offline. And I'm sure Leslie's now going to touch on some of the key indicators that you can see across brand awareness and follow.
Well, I think it's the nature of marketing as a whole, really. Marketing is about creating brand awareness and building a strong brand, which we talk about. It's kind of, if your presence isn't there, if you're not standing up against your competitors, then you're likely to lose those leads and not get generation in for your sales. So, you know, it is looking at kind of, I guess, you know, your definite goes to are your hits on your website, you know, how can you attract more people to them? What are your engagement rates on your social media posts? And yeah, you know, what conversations are you having with your target audience? What can you generate to your sales? And I don't think it's always a case of you can put a number to it or a cost to it. It really is a case of, well, if I stop doing this, then what's going to happen? And it's that fight against keeping your brand out there above anybody else. And like, you know, Ollie mentioned earlier on with Salesforce, you know, they're a classic case of that. They are not going to stop spending because they don't want anybody else to take their space.
I absolutely agree with that. And we kind of call it lighthouse marketing. The light stays on, so it's flashing, our name revolves, and people go, oh, look, Masters, let's talk to them. And that has proved dividends. And again, we're not a business, without a shameless plug, we're doing very well. The COVID has been great for us. You know, right now, I do not need a lot of leads coming into the business because we are in a strong position. The warehouse is very full. You know, we measure the business. We are a service-based business, not a sell at all costs business. So prices, so it's getting that balance for us right. And I look at the website and think, we get a lot of visitors. They get to a certain point, they drop away. Why is that? So then looking at it again and I'm just doing a little refresh because I think it's a little dated and trying to make it a little easier to interact with us. The CTA is a bit better, various bits like that. And without being shamelessly salesy, if that makes sense. Like me, I'm an ex-GE Capital guy from some years ago, and then these guys were a client of mine, and it's keeping it to that sense, but saying, look, actually, it's not a massive marketing budget. When you were talking about those percentage numbers, I was thinking they would freak if I told them they want to spend that much money on marketing, honestly. But it's just trying to say to the business, look, this is what we're doing and this is what it's generating, you know, and some of them have got quite narrow visions. So it's like hard to think like that, not like that, if that makes sense, because the business is successful. So it's saying to them, look, what we're doing right now is right. And spending that money there is right, you know, and that's I've already speaking to the marketing agency that I used to say, look, how do you want me to measure you? You know, how are we going to justify your ROI? And that has been kind of the challenge. Well, yeah, through LinkedIn, we use LinkedIn Premium. And again, it was a very interesting point that, because a lot of the time I'm connected to sort of circa 3,000 people, our company LinkedIn page, 500 or 600. And what happens is they tend to do stuff, then I share it. But really interesting for you guys to say that actually probably better going out from my network first and then the company page sharing it, which was really interesting for me because we've done it the other way. Again, you know, and I've had some great returns from LinkedIn, just people are connecting, measured, Merv, do you want to look at this? Thank you very much. You know, which during the pre-Brexit crisis, totaled with us having 3 million jars of jam in stock. So yeah, that's a really interesting point without going off topic, but trying to get to sort of nail that ROI. When, you know, we measure when leads come into the business, I look at them and I even grade them, quality, non-quality, you know. Yes, we could do it, but we don't want to. So actually that's a quality lead. No, not for us, non-quality, too small, too wrong area, whatever. We kind of do that to build the ROI. And even if someone finds us and I speak to them, I would even say, if they say, well, I Googled you, what did you type in, you know, to try and pick up keyword stuff, things like that, and looking at that depth. But it is, so, you know, I kind of say that anything that comes from Google, from our perspective, or drives to the website, has been generated somewhere with a marketing activity, I would suggest, because we can see organic searches, we can see new searches, but yeah, it's just trying to get those stats down. So when we have a board meeting, I go, it looks like that, and they go, great. So yeah, it's still quite a difficult topic.
You touched on an interesting point as well, and which is that the perception is when business is going bad, spend some money on marketing, and actually when business is going well, that's the time to really double down on that brand, right? It's the opposite to the perception of what people think, because when you know what's the saying in life? Any turkey can fly in a tornado, right? And so the problem is with that though, and this is exactly what Salesforce are preventing, is they don't want some other turkey to take their market share. So it's interesting. The perception is that actually when things are going well, that's the time to really put the foot down on the marketing side. Would you agree with that, Leslie?
Yeah, and I would say from what you've just been saying, you're doing exactly the right thing. So if you're in a really good position where you're bringing that business in, now's the time to really try and hone that marketing down and to see where you can get those extra wins. So if you're in that really wealthy position of like, okay, well, we could be in a position where we can turn down business, don't stop marketing. Make sure then, how do we actually market to that target market more specifically? You know, how do we segment them down, and where do we want to get that business from? And it really is a point of taking that level and kind of going, right, what are our competitors doing? What are we doing? Where can we make those improvements, and how do we do them? And, you know, what you were saying about the call to action on your website, noticing that, you know, people are dropping off, they're not necessarily converting to calls, you know, looking at all of that, how can you change? What can you change to make that work better for you?
And that's what we're trying to do. And again, it's kind of different because the logistics industry, it is, you know, I mean, unfortunately, it's the backbone of the country, and people still don't realise that. But it is what it is. You know, we are a warehousing business. We take stock in, we store it, we dispatch it, we move it around. It's very simple. And when I came into the industry, it's for want of a better phrase, how do we make logistics how do we get people to value it? Because I tend not to look at my competitors too much, because we're all racing each other to the bottom. It's almost, well, we'll do it for this. And we're like, no, we won't do it for that, because we're going to do it properly. We're going to do it quality, you know?
It doesn't need to be about price when you're looking at your competitors. It's about how they're getting their name out there, and what is working for them, and what can you learn from them. And if it's a case of, right, well, we're nailing it on all of this, then that's amazing. And that's what you should be doing. You know, don't be frightened of looking at your competitors and understanding what they're trying to do. But don't ever make it just about price, because you'll always have an added value. You've always got a uniqueness over that competitor.
Absolutely, that's great. And I did do that when looking to refresh the website. I kind of picked the guys that were around us. I had a look at what they were doing. Some of the stuff, I have to say, I quite liked, and the way that they got it marketed, because it's not a particularly glamorous industry. You know, big trucks, big buildings. You know, there's a lot deeper than that, a lot more tech that goes into it and everything else. But it's getting that. You know, when people say to me, what is the USP of your business? We talk about it, and it's actually the people. It's the people that make it happen. And it's getting that message out that come to us, and we won business because they said, oh, we were with a company that was very similar to you. A VC bought them, and now nobody cares about us, you know, and stuff like that. So it's getting that out, but it's also trying to measure that. That's a tough measurement, and that's you know, stuff I picked up today, looking at a lot of the stats you guys have had, giving me some food for thought when I talk to them next, to say, look, around just actually saying to someone, look, we spend this much a year on marketing, and actually it's good value for money, you know. So actually what I'd like to do is spend this much, you know. But again, we kind of have that philosophy of like having a tap that you can turn on and turn off, because I also don't want a load of tremendous leads landing in my lap right now, because I would be saying, sorry, I haven't got any room for you. I can't fit that in. I can't do that. And it's a bit like constant invites to a party. If you keep saying no, people stop inviting you. So it's like that really fine line.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. We'll circulate the slides around, right, Sadie, so that you can have those stats.
That would be
so
great.
That follow-up conversation will be a bit better. With that, I'm aware that it's 4 minutes past. We're all touching conversations that I could have all day long, and I'm happily tell you about how Marlboro were the 6th most smoked cigarette in the US. It became the 1st most smoked within 3 years, because nothing is more cowboy than a cowboy, right? But we can have that chat. Marlboro's not a brand I support, but at the end of the day, it was quite amazing how they did that in the 80s. On that basis, it's the last one, which is a bit of a terrible shame in the marketing series. I've really enjoyed it. So first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to Sadie. Thank you, Leslie, for your interactions today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. And thanks to Sadie as well for putting together a great programme, and for having me as one of the speakers. So thank you.
Definitely. If anybody wants a further conversation, we'll book more than an hour, and we'll make sure I've got hot coffee somewhere. but on that basis, yeah, I'd love a follow-up conversation with a few people. That'd be great. Sadie, what's next? Face-to-face events this week, isn't it?
It is. We've got 5 places available at our Cambridge event. So if anybody's interested, just ping me an email and I can let you have the link.
That's on Thursday, right?
It
Thursday
is. And
afternoon.
next week we've got Ely. There are places at Ely as well.
So if anybody wants a cup of coffee on Thursday, the round's on me. I'll be there. So if anyone's interested, I hope you sort that out. Thursday morning, we've got the HR Leadership Forum. Again, which would be a good session. The title of that escapes me.
Me as well.
Well, you can find out on the chamber page. But yeah, thank you to everybody. Thanks for coming on the call. Merv, I'll make sure you get those stats so that you've got some supporting evidence in your conversation. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for attending. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ollie, as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sadie. Bye.